Hello, my name is Joe Cartwright and welcome to my studio. In today's video I'm going to show you a number of techniques which when combined will help you create realistic looking rocks. Let's get started. This is the drawing we're going to be using today. It's purely made up out of my imagination. I've got this nice grouping of rocks in the foreground with a distant hill that helps balance this foreground rock formation. The first thing I'm going to do is erase some of the pencil marks. I've drawn them quite strongly here just so that you can easily see them on the screen, but I don't want really dark pencil marks showing through for the distance and maybe along this edge. I'll begin by wetting the back of my paper. Wetting the back, not the front of the paper. Quite a lot of water. I have a link to a video I produced on why I wet the back of the paper and not the front, and if you are not familiar with the technique, I suggest you have a look at that. The link is in the description section below. Okay, we'll let that sit there. The colours for this painting, some cobalt blue for the sky, a green for the ground, and a dark brown for the rocks. So we'll get some cobalt blue. And for the green, I'll start with my cool yellow. In my case it's aureolin, but any cool leaning yellow will do. I'll add a bit of cobalt turquoise and then some raw umber just to dull that off. And a little bit of French ultramarine as well. That'll do. The rocks, they're going to be reasonably dark, so I'll start with some French ultramarine. Throw in some burnt sienna. And this is really what I call my starting colour. I'll modify it once I start painting the rocks. But I've got some time while the paper absorbs the water, so I can use it to mix up this paint. And that will do. Go back to our paper. We'll wet it again a couple of times. With the board. It's going to be a fairly simple sky, just cobalt blue with some clouds, but very simple clouds. They're only going to be a single colour. like that'll do. Clean my brush, take out about 2/3 of the water. Now I'm coming in and pushing the brush, so it's these little hairs that are sticking to the paper that are going to help create some of the texture. And I'm touching the blue, but not over the whole area, meaning there are some areas of untouched paper. That'll do. This is just a quick demonstration. And then with that weak blue that's still left on my brush, I'm going to run that down to the horizon line. Right, now we're going to paint the distant grass. You see, I picked up some of that paint and then dipped my brush in water to dilute it, because the colour in the distance is going to be lighter, and that's because of the effect of the atmosphere. So I'm dragging some of that paint down and leaving some ragged edges, and they'll help when I come to paint my grasses later. And now as we move into the foreground, I'm going to add some raw umber to this, just to warm it up. Very quick. These paintings don't have to take a lot of time. Can leave a little bit of untouched paper there just to add the odd little highlight. Pick up my size 8 brush. Let's grab some burnt sienna. Small amount of French ultramarine. I don't want the burnt sienna to be too warm. Just getting rid of a stray dot. Here I'm just drizzling some water just to lighten that edge a little bit more. In fact, I'll even splatter some water to add some more texture. And all of this is like adding more detail. So as things come into the foreground, you're going to get more detail. At this stage, we have to let this dry, because if I start trying to paint the rocks, the paint's going to bleed everywhere. You'll see here some of the paint's bled up. I don't mind that because I'm going to paint the hill in the distance very soon. So what I'm going to do, if I was at home on my own, I'd probably just sit this flat. So right now the board's sitting at 20 degrees. I'd normally just sit it flat so the paint doesn't continue to run down, because I'm very happy with some of these effects that I've got here. Go and have a coffee, then when it's dry, come back and continue with the painting. But to speed things up today, I'm just going to get the hairdryer out and dry it with that. Alright, so for the distant hills, I'm just going to create a violet colour. So I'll use some of this cobalt blue, a little bit of permanent rose, throw in some French ultramarine, small amount of raw umber, a bit of aureolin, just a hint at the green. Oops. Now I'm going to just mix some aureolin, French ultramarine, some raw umber. Let's throw in some of this cobalt blue. Just using some colours to create a green that I think will work with these distant hills. And decide which hill is closer to us, so I'm going to make it this one. Let's just change its shape a little bit. So now by adding this green, this dull green to this hill and this one, let's push that one into the distance. Just adding some texture in the planes down below. Didn't quite want that to come down so far. I'm going to put some trees way back here. They're a long way away. They're going to be a dull green colour. I'll just start with raw umber and French ultramarine. Because I'm painting into quite wet paint, going in fairly thick. The water on the surface will actually dilute this paint. All right, I'm going to dry that and then we can work on the rocks. When you use a hairdryer, always wait till the paper cools down before you start painting, otherwise the paint will evaporate too quickly. I've really just concentrated on drying this area here because this is what I'm going to work on next. It's important with a painting like this to have an idea of where the light's coming from. In my case, the light's coming from this direction, and we're going to use the light to help give form to our rocks. And we're going to do that by making sure that the rocks have a light area, and the lightest area will be the part that the light hits perpendicular to the rock. Then usually a fairly large mid-tone region, and then some very dark areas in the crevices and that. That's just a general guideline. You can alter the proportions to suit you. So let's start. So what I've done here is effectively I've just placed the mid-tone. Now I'm going to take out most of the paint from my brush, and I've painted this all the way across, and the paint's now been sitting there for a while, and the longer it sits there, the more it will stain the paper, so that when I come in and lift some of this, I'm lifting the highlights, but it's still leaving some paint there, right? So it's not all coming off. Because the paint continues to flow till it hits the dry part of the paper, you can already see that these rocks are starting to develop some form, because we've got a light area, a mid-tone, and an even darker area here. But I'm going to now exaggerate some of these tones, shapes. Pick up some of this paint. Now I'm going to add more French ultramarine and burnt sienna to it. Even some raw umber just to vary it. If your rocks have some red in it, then you can always put in some permanent rose or whatever other colour. Let's put some permanent rose into it. This is quite a bit thicker, and I'm using it to put in the darkest areas. Make this a bit warmer. There's many different techniques you can use for painting rocks. I'm going to just throw in a few different ones here. Let's lift some of this. Now, one of the ways we can add some more texture to the rocks is we can get a piece of old credit card. I have one here where I've cut it into a strip, and then I've cut the corners off so that this is rounder than these. So that's just a little cut there. This is the normal card angle. So I can use it to create slightly different effects. Now remember, the light's coming from here, so let's come down. And what this does is just gives the rock some more angular shapes. And at the edge of some of those sharper shapes, you can drop in a bit of paint. If I see a shape I like, I make sure I don't get rid of it. This is a bit too regular. Okay, now I'm going to take this thicker paint, drag the brush through the edge of the palette, squish the brush down so that the hair's splayed like that. And we can use it to create some texture like that. I have a fan brush that I can also use for this effect, but for these shorter videos, and because they're mainly aimed at beginners, maybe intermediate, I'd like to show you techniques that don't require too many special brushes and materials. Now some of these edges I can soften. So clean my brush and just modify them. The important thing is when you see something that you like, this is looking like a nice rock. Well, I shouldn't start doing too much to it. Here, this square looks a bit too strange, so I'm going to just change that. Remember, the light's mainly coming through here. I have another video which gives about 10 techniques for creating rocks, and I'll link that in the description section below for you to have a look at as well. Just grab some raw umber and burnt sienna. And you can even, if you're feeling brave, you can just splatter some paint. Well, that's what happens when you're feeling brave sometimes. What you should do, even if you are feeling brave, get a piece of scrap paper and just cover it like that and protect the area of the painting you don't want splatter to hit. You'll still get some that escape. And now I'll clean my brush. I'm going to take out all the paint and splay the hairs out. And then here, I'm going to drag some of that darker colour and just break up that edge. Now we'll throw in some other grasses using the same technique but pushing upwards. So this is just supposed to represent dried grass. Now here, vary the colour. Just re-establishing some of these darks that I've lost. Some of these light dots, you can just put dark underneath them and that'll turn them into little rocks with a highlight. Now, these rocks would also have a shadow. So let's mix colour for the shadow. Usually I use French ultramarine. I can mix it into the leftover cobalt blue because the French ultramarine is going to overpower that. Add a little bit of permanent rose and a tiny bit of burnt sienna, which is already mixed in that palette. Dilute some of that mixture. Just hinting at trees and shapes. Leave little areas that aren't in shadow. Again, I'm breaking up the edge so that the shadow shapes look like they're in long grass. Here I've created a bit of a straight edge. I'm going to just break that up. And the other thing you can do here, I just have to wait a little bit longer. It's still a bit too shiny. We'll get our credit card and we're going to scrape out a few highlights as additional blades of grass. If you go in while it's still shiny, you'll get dark grasses. And in areas where it's barely damp, then you'll get a light mark. So let's have a go. Again, I don't want to do too much of this. It's really just shorthand saying, yes, there's some grasses there that are lighter than others. Vary the angle and the shape. Good. Now I'm going to get my little rigger brush. This is just a very cheap rigger. It's also called a liner. Now I have to be careful. This is still a bit wet. Let me go dry this. And that'll just help connect the distance into the foreground. Good. Throw some birds in the sky. Vary their size and shape and the distance between them. And they're directing the eye into the focal point, which in this case is these rocks. Try not to make it too obvious. I hope this video has given you some useful tips for painting rocks in the landscape. If you like this style of video and would like to see more of these quicker demonstrations, please let me know in the comments section below. And if you are able, please consider supporting me on Patreon. I look forward to seeing you for the next one.